So the next stage is we're going to bring up two great entrepreneurs from Nalu Cafe. So Jota and Tomas, can you please come up? So we're going to make a little transition. So we've been talking at you for a lot of time. Now we're going to have a much more conversational discussion. So is it possible to bring up the lights? You guys can see us well, or whatever works for the camera. So please have a sit down. Good sit. So these two chairs, please. Sit next to me. I took a shower this morning.
You don't bite.
So you can read about their bios in the program, but Jota is a good friend of mine. He owns Nalu Cafe. I don't know if any of you guys have been to Nalu Cafe, but there's one in Ward Center, there's one in Haleiwa, there's one in Kailua. You guys are going to open one in Waikiki. They're also the owners of Off the Wall. For Nalu Cafe, if you haven't been there, I recommend the steak sandwich. It's very good. So these are two people. They're both from Latin America, and they came to Hawaii and started a business. And so we're going to just sit down and listen to hear about their experiences. How are you guys doing?
Great. Thank you
for
having us.
Thanks for
Wonderful.
having us.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for coming. So can you just provide us a little bit of background about yourselves in Nalu Cafe and Off the Wall to the audience?
Sure. My name is Jorge Munoz. I was born and raised in Chile. Moved to the States when I was 12, and then moved to Hawaii when I was 19, straight out of high school, to pursue a surfboard shaping career, which I owned the business for until the age of about 26. And then went on to start Nalu Health Bar with Tommy, my wife, and his wife. Most people say that's recipe for disaster, but we're still going pretty strong.
7 years strong.
7 years later. So yeah, we started Nalu Health Bar just because we saw an opportunity in Kailua, and we were all just kind of tired of the jobs we had and wanted to pursue our dream. The American dream. And opened Nalu Kailua in 2015. Then went on to open Nalu Ward in 2018, I believe. Haleiwa just a couple of years ago, and now we're building out Waikiki as we speak.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So I've never opened a business or a restaurant. So can you guys just describe your experience and what it took to open the restaurant, what risks that you did, and what were some of the difficulties that you faced?
So my name is Tomas Kloosterboer. I'm actually from Argentina. I moved here about 11 years ago. Circling back a little bit, what I'd say is for us coming from South American countries, we live a whole different economy where everything's unstable. So the challenges that we see over there are way more complicated. Interest rates or like inflation at like 50% a year. So now when we see like 5% interest inflation, it's like, okay, it's not so bad. That's true. So it's kind of one of those things that we learn how to navigate through situations in a really rough environment. When we moved here, looking back at it, we realized that things were way easier than they were back at home, but they're still super complicated. And we got extremely lucky in a sense where, to me, being an entrepreneur is being creative and coming up with like solutions to daily problems. And when we opened Kailua, we had no money. We applied for 5 different loans and everything got rejected. So we're like, okay, if we really want to make this happen, how are we supposed to do it? And yeah, we just got creative. At one point, our contractor told us, this is not going to work. Just try and pull all your money out of it and move on. We're like, that's not an option for us. Like, we need to make it happen. Our backs are against the wall.
Credit cards were maxed out.
Yeah, life savings into it. So yeah, it's just being creative and navigating through situations on a daily basis.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest challenges for us is construction, DPP, like we were saying. It's the time it takes is just it's kind of mind-blowing sometimes to get permits. We're lucky now that Nalu is established and we can negotiate with landlords to get construction time where we're not paying rent. But some of these small startups, like when we started Kailua, they don't give you that. So it's really tough, and then not being able to get loans when you're a startup like that because you have no backing, years of doing business. It's almost impossible to the point where we put on all our life savings, maxed out our credit cards, and we're working, all 4 of us owners, full-time jobs, and also working full-time at Nalu. So we always laugh and say that, we couldn't imagine us doing what we had to do to start a business here in Hawaii. Now that we have families and have kids and children, there's absolutely no way that we could risk everything we did like that. It would be impossible. So I don't know, like we were saying, I don't know how to fix the DPP, how long things take, but.
Well, would you mind sharing your experience of how you got your permit in the end? Because they have a great experience. They have very Latin American approach to things.
Let's just go. Let's say if we would have done everything the way everything was required to be, we would have not been in business. That's the reality of it. We got lucky that we're somewhat like old people, and some people wanted to help us and make things happen. But if we would have followed every single rule that the DPP has, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
I mean, everything's up to date now.
Yeah, everything's good now. I mean, 3 weeks for a check to clear.
Yeah, just it's, with our architect, she's a pretty known architect here, Davy Young, DKKY. She's built all Starbucks at a lot of dealerships, South Shore Market. We were laughing the other day how right now it takes 3 weeks to clear a payment. So we started construction in Waikiki, and we just started taking down stuff from the old subway that was there. And somebody called DPP, and we didn't have the final permit on our window. Everything was already approved, and we just started doing minor things. Inspector came out and said, "You guys cannot keep on going. You'll get a triple fine if we find out that you're doing anything." So we went down to DPP and said, "Okay, well, we need the final permit." And they said, "Well, you have to submit your payment, and it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to clear." So then we tried paying with a credit card or cash, and they said, "No, it has to be a check, and it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to clear." And then our permit took about 12 months from the time we started it to the time that it got approved with a third-party reviewer, independent third-party reviewer. 12 months about. Then if you don't pick it up in 4 weeks, you have to start the whole process over, and that's happened to some people. We heard a story of someone that had an emergency and it happened, and you have to literally start the whole process over again. I don't know how we can fix it, but there's definitely some things that can be fixed there. We've worked with contractors here in the state that come from other cities that says, you can walk out with a permit in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, full permit from the time you apply to the time it's issued. So,
What percentage of your time would you say you spend dealing with permitting and other things versus focusing on your clients?
In the beginning, it was a substantial amount. It was another headache that So this story that happened with our contractor telling us, let's pull out and let's just try and walk away from it as free and clear as we can. It happened on a Friday. We didn't even tell our wives about it because we were like, they're going to freak out. Let's wait until Monday. And then on Monday, actually my wife was like, "Oh, let's go and work at Nalu on Saturday." I'm like, "No, please, let's just focus on something else. Let's go surf." And then on Monday, we walked to the DPP and we started banging on everybody's doors, asking "Hey, can we please take a look at this situation? This is what's going on, and we can't afford to be standing where we're at right now." So more than the time, it was the headache and like the worry of like, okay, how do we get this done? Like, we really need this to happen.
Then we need to just start paying rent.
Yeah.
We didn't have the knowledge and the backing that we have now, where we can negotiate those things that we're able to negotiate now with landlords. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Jota for a while now, and I just wanted to. I think it's a really powerful story. These are two immigrants that come, wanted to provide a service, that delicious sandwiches. Again, the steak sandwich, and and they are maxing out. They're taking all the risk upon themselves, and most of the risk, or a lot of the risk that they're coming from, is stuff that pertains to us here in Hawaii, are the laws that we create, right? And we have to wonder, are these necessary? Or is this the way we want to do things, right? And what you hear about them is that they weren't worried, like, yes, they're worried about their clients, if this can work, everything like this, but they're also worried about permitting and processing that they're not even aware of. And the fact, there's this, one of the insights of economics is when you have high levels of regulation and things, ostensibly it's to protect the little guy. But usually you're rewarding incumbents, people who know how to work the system, right? So you hire people to interact with DPP as well, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So additional cost, right? Instead of us having a service-minded, as a government, being a service-minded people and saying, how can we serve you to make this environment better so you guys can focus on what you're doing best, which is deciding how to deal with your clients? They're dealing with the government, right? Now, we can decide if that's legitimate or not, but we need to investigate these types of things,
Yeah, we had not hired that third party. We have friends that are well over a year in permitting that are doing it on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So over a year to get things started. So it takes a while. Is there anything else you guys want to share with us?
I think as far as things we struggle with are, what was the
Kelly?
Yeah, he brought up for employment. That's one of the biggest struggles we see in a small business like Nalu, is the price of housing. For an entry-level job like Nalu, a lot of employees share rooms at the entry level, and then even mid-level of payment or salaries is just extremely tough for them, especially in the areas that we're at, like Kailua, South Shore Market, Haleiwa, and now Waikiki. It's become extremely difficult to find people to work.
It's actually coming to the point that whenever we interview people, we ask them, how much is your rent? $1,500. Well, Nalu is not the right place for you then. And we've seen people, we learned that the hard way. We had a girl working with us in Kailua. She was awesome, but she was paying $1,200 a month back then, probably like 3 years ago. And she's like, I cannot afford my living. The last girl was in Kailua as well. Her rent was $1,300 a month. We're like, Emma, this is not gonna work for you as much as we'd love to hire you. And she's like, don't worry about it, I've got savings. So I know that I'm gonna be burning through them. So she decided to stay for as long as she could. I think she lasted for about 4 months until she had to move back to the mainland.
So yeah,
So this is another example of where like implicit costs in other places, other decisions are indirectly affecting your employees having higher turnover, and then it makes it harder for you guys to run a business.
Absolutely. Like, it was brought up by Keller. We're having to keep employees that are much lower caliber because we can't afford to lose them. And they're running our businesses the way sometimes we don't want to, and not the right way, because we just can't afford to lose people. We've had to close our business multiple times in the last year because there just isn't enough employees. Even with us going to work on the floor, we'd have to close down. We actually had to close down Haleiwa recently, a few days in a row, early, because there just isn't enough employees. And it's impossible, people show up, we get out of 20 applicants, we maybe get that call and say they're gonna come to an interview. We maybe get 5 that come, and then when you say, okay, you're hired, maybe one shows up. I think a lot of people are just still trying to milk that unemployment, thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. Can you guys, I mean, coming from Latin America, which is a notoriously hard business environment, can you compare your experiences living, operating there to Hawaii? Are we better? Are we worse?
This is paradise.
Well, he's Argentina. Argentina in the world is a very special case.
Yeah, I'd say Chile's a little bit more stable than maybe Tommy has better experiences.
Oh, I would never want to start another business in Argentina. I will do anything else but that. Yeah, so that's what we were saying in the beginning. Like, yeah, it's been a somewhat hostile environment, like starting a business over here, but it all depends on what you compare it to. Plumbing contractor will tell us you can walk into an Arizona DPP department and you can walk out with a permit, in an issue permit in the same day. And for us, it's been a year. I was like, okay, it could be better, but it also could be worse.
Yeah, price of construction has also gone up drastically.
Yeah.
So I think from the first novel that we built, our cost for building this fourth one is probably double.
Wow.
Yeah.
So double the cost. Wait, can you go through that again? So it's doubled to build this from your first one?
Yeah, 7 years ago.
7 years.
Yeah.
Costs have gone up double.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you think it is? I mean, you guys have also grown up in tough operating environments, and that probably helped you. So what can you just say one thing about being Latin American and how that has been useful as an entrepreneur there and how you brought your skills here to work in Hawaii?
I think it just makes you more hungry because it's just so hard to make it in countries like where we come from, that you have to get creative, like Tommy was saying, and you have to work 10 times harder than the other guy. So yeah, just getting creative, and then like, Tommy was saying, coming here is, even though we have problems, it's not as bad as where we come from. So for us, it was maybe a little bit easier than it is for people that are born and raised here. Maybe I'm not sure if that sounds right, but
to some extent.
Yeah, and one of the things you could always argue is Hawaii has a high immigrant culture, and immigrants have always been essential participants in entrepreneurs and pushing things forward and give a lot of the energy to this place, right?
Yeah.
Let's open it up to questions from the audience for our panelists. And what we'll do is people here in the audience, we can ask first, and then we're going to open it up to people online. So if you guys have something online, please send in your questions to I'm getting yelled at, but to Zoom, write them in, and then they'll summarize those questions and they'll ask us. So first of all, can we get some questions from the audience? Or are there any? Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Joe Kent, Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. You talked about third-party review, and that's supposed to be like the fast track, but it took a year, right? So, the third-party review is kind of like a private sector solution, but why did that take so long?
I think recently is because of the investigation going on with the DPP, I believe is it's causing all the backlogs, and Nalu Ward took, I think, with about 7 months.
With courtesy over there.
Yeah, we got a courtesy inspection which right now are not being issued. So that was part of the problem there. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I don't know if there's anybody from DPP here, but I think they're still in their investigation. So it doesn't look like timing is gonna get better anytime soon.
And I feel like it would have taken even longer if we would have done it the way we did Kailua back then. It probably would have taken a lot longer than a year.
Any other questions? Do we have any questions from Zoom? No. All right, well, I just want to give a huge round of applause to you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate you guys coming out and sharing your experiences with us. Again, what I want to highlight here is these are two, two couples that have really put their whole lives on the line to provide services, and they're doing really well. But like a lot of the things that they're worried most about is not their customer base, which is interesting. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Tomas. So next, we're going to bring up Elisia Flores, which is the CEO of L&L, which is a brand that most of us are familiar with. So please come on up. Thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is an honor having a established CEO like yourself talk about things. And so before we were speaking, like Nalu Cafe is much more of a smaller business, a really important business, and L&L represents a larger business with a little bit more of a national perspective of things. So could you just start off by giving us a brief background about yourself and a brief background about L&L and how it relates to Hawaii?
Yeah, but I have to say, even though we're a bigger business, I love the Nalu Cafe story. Most of our franchisees are entrepreneurs like them, where they have 1 or 2 stores, not very many stores, immigrants as well. So it's a lot of shared stories, so I appreciated hearing from them. My name is Elisia Flores, the CEO at L&L. Born and raised here in Hawaii, spent a lot of time, left for college on the mainland and stayed there for many years working at General Electric in different roles, but mostly finance capacity. My dad, Eddie Flores, and his business partner started L&L over 40 years ago. And eventually they were able to get me to come back home. And so, gosh, I stopped counting, but I think about 8 years ago, I came back home, joined the organization as a CFO, and then in 2019 became the CEO. But L&L, sorry, so we have, by the end of this year, we'll have 218 locations in 16 different states. We're opening in 2 more states by the end of this year. Most of our stores now are on the mainland. We have about 67 here in the Hawaii Islands, and the rest are on the mainland.
Fantastic. Can you explain how L&L is structured, and what is your unique perspective as somebody who works in corporate versus your franchisees?
Yeah, so L&L is a franchised organization. L&L, where I work, we're the franchisor. And as the franchisor, this is not typical, but we don't really own any corporate stores. A lot of times franchisors will own a lot of corporate stores. So all of our stores are franchised. That's why we have a lot of franchisees who own 1 store, some franchisees who own more than 1 store. Maybe the maximum we have is 10 stores. Our structure as a franchise organization is pretty different. You think of like a McDonald's or a Subway as a typical franchise organization, and you go to 2 McDonald's or 2 Subways, and it's like the same experience, right? You go to 2 L&Ls, and it's like not the same experience. The store looks a little bit different. The katsu sauce probably tastes a little bit different. Maybe they're wearing their uniforms, maybe not. So I came in from a very corporate background, and that was kind of difficult to accept. But what I've found is that it's very interesting. We're kind of this hybrid organization where we are able to provide a lot of support that a large corporation is able to, like during PPP, and we can talk about that a bit more. But our franchisees still have a lot of autonomy to do a lot of things on their own, which makes them a lot faster than being a McDonald's or Subway franchisee.
Great. And so one of the things that we're interested in here, what are the major trends that you guys are seeing as a corporate entity, and what are your franchisees seeing in terms of their business?
Yeah, I'll start with the franchisees. And this was touched on a lot. I won't talk about it too much, but costs across the P&L, every single line item, right, has gone up. Food costs, rent maybe has been the most stable, but it goes up every year per your lease. Labor, if you can find it, has gone up. Containers, everything has gone up. And if you try to find ways to save costs with technology, let's say, technology is a new expense item. So it's been, for the past 3 years, so in 2020 when COVID hit, it was a really, really, really scary time for restaurants. I just become CEO for less than a year, and I thought this was going to be the end of the family legacy, that restaurants were going to not survive COVID. And a lot of restaurants did not survive COVID. Once it stabilized, though, then we were hit with labor shortage. And then after that, we were hit with inflation and all the cost impacts, and we're still suffering that. So I think, in terms of trends or what we're looking at for restaurants, at least through this year and through the end of next year, is still continued cost pressure, and you'll continue to see maybe restaurant, mom and pops especially, close. It's been interesting though, kind of as a franchisor side, again, in the beginning of the pandemic, I was really worried that we would be closing a lot of stores. We have, in the last 3 years, closed maybe 1 or 2 stores. One that probably would have closed regardless if the pandemic happened. Sales were kind of slow, and the other, like a lease, was not renewed. So we're very lucky that we have not had to close stores. And the thing that has happened that was surprising is that I've had a lot of store sales, transfers. What's driving that is these are longtime franchisees, just like the Nalu Cafe owners there, because labor shortage, they're working in their stores and they're working there 24/7, and restaurant is really hard. And they can't get the product, so they're having to drive around to wherever, Costco, Waihata, Restaurant Depot on the mainland. They have to shut their store down some days, or making less profit. And so now they're saying, forget it, it's not worth it. This business that I used to love, I'm not making money, I don't want to do it anymore, I want to sell my store. The flip side, on the positive side, we haven't had to close those stores. We've been able to find buyers for them. Because of the pandemic, I think, there have been so many people who are inspired to become entrepreneurs. I don't know if it was because they realized that anything can happen, or maybe they didn't like their corporate job anymore and the different rules that were coming out from their jobs in terms of how they had to work. Or they just had more time to reflect on life and decided that they wanted to create this for their family and a legacy for their family. So every store and every franchisee that wanted to sell their store, we've been able to very quickly, more than ever before, find a buyer for them.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
So if you were, somebody's going to become a franchisee, and you sat down and you had a conversation with them, and on one hand, they're worried about, if you could just categorize the immediate concerns that they would have, which is like the supply side, and what you think is going to be resolved by the markets naturally, right? So presumably costs are not going to be going up in perpetuity forever, or maybe it is.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. But like, what do you expect? And then what are the kind of like the longer term challenges? What are the challenges that existed before the pandemic that are still with us that you would counsel to a franchisee?
Yeah, I think even though I think on the cost side, let's say cost of goods, that will stabilize. I think on the labor side, and I think Kyle brought it up in his presentation, you have a lot of people who used to work in the restaurant, and now during the pandemic, they became Uber or Lyft drivers, or they're doing something else. I don't think they're gonna come back. So I think labor will remain a challenge for restaurants. And then, in addition to just that fact, you have legislation pushing minimum wage. And so I think there's just labor piece is just going to continue to have a lot of pressure. The thing that I see that I'm, a little worried, again, I go back to us being kind of this hybrid where we're big, but we're small. The thing that I think about and I worry about in terms of the fabric of restaurants going forward here, especially in Hawaii, but also on the mainland, you look at the stores that closed during the pandemic, and it's all the mom and pops. I mean, even bigger ones, but it's still guys who had one or two restaurants, like big names like Alan Wong's, Chef Mavro, but a lot of the really smaller stores that we'll miss. At the same time, so I think the statistic from Hawaii Restaurant Association was that pre-pandemic there were 4,000 restaurants, and these are approximate numbers. At the bottom, it was 3,000, and now we're up around 800. So there's some recovery. But I think a lot of the mix is very different. A lot of the ones that closed, the mom and pops. And I think last week there was a story, I think the Square Barrels group closed, at the same time Chick-fil-A opened. So the smaller shops are closing, and at the same time you have these big chains coming in. And I think the big chains are great. I think there's still business here, they create jobs here, but not all the money that these big chains generate stay in Hawaii. Plus, again, you have a very different mix kind of in culture of the stores that exist, of these very big mainland chains versus the entrepreneur who's owning one store, family operated, more community oriented. That's what I think about a lot here in Hawaii is kind of what is that mix going to be in the future. I think that has changed.
Is there anything else? Can you think of anything that we could do to mitigate that trend?
I think as much as we can do to foster entrepreneurship here, I think Education is a really big piece. I think UH is doing a lot of interesting things to help continue to grow and create entrepreneurs. I think the easier that we can make it for local companies to open their stores with partnerships with banks or wherever they could get funding from, and education. Again, a lot of our franchisees survived because they had the help of the franchisor to help them guide them through these very complicated processes. And if it's a young person or an immigrant kind of opening the store, it's very complicated. It's hard for them to get through the process in the most efficient way. They're probably not doing it in an efficient way, which is an extra cost to them. So the easier that we can make the process, I think the better it is for local people to be able to open up their own business.
Yeah. And if you had, you have this really unique perspective of seeing a lot of different businesses operating at once. If you could just identify 3 to 5, issues, major issues in no particular order that Hawaii could work on to make it easier for your franchisees to operate here, what would be on that list?
Yeah, I think, well, since we've talked about it a lot, we'll just throw permitting out there again. It's such a long process. And you think 12, Kyle and I were talking about this a little bit after hearing the Nalu story. You have, let's say, an average a year for your permit to pass. And if you're a small shop, you're probably paying rent the whole time, which means when you open your store, the working cap, you're in a hole and you don't have as long of a runway to make your store successful. So from the day you open your door, you have a much higher chance of closing. And that's a terrible way to start your business, right? So, if that burden could be lifted. I think there are also a lot of other things that can be done in terms of communication with lawmakers. There were, so Bill 40, which is the container law, plastics law, the first iteration of that was,
Just so it was a law that said that you cannot no longer do disposable plastic containers and it had to be biodegradable.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. It was on my mind so much I forgot. But the first iteration of it, just quite frankly, was ridiculous. I don't think there was any communication with restaurants. And the first iteration was, I don't think at all the intention of what the lawmakers wanted. It included retail. So any retail, your Mauna Loa macadamia nuts, the plastic tray that it came in, they wouldn't be able to produce that here in Hawaii. So it didn't have the right effect, but I don't think there was communication between lawmakers and the businesses it was going to affect, which is why it became this law that didn't make sense and really burdened businesses more than it needed to in terms of trying to fix it later on, or businesses that didn't even need to be involved but kind of got roped in on accident. And I think the other thing, I enjoyed your economic lessons. I thought it was very interesting. It's been a while since I've been to school, and I didn't really want to go to school again this morning, but it was
too bad.
But I really think the focus on the cost side is very interesting. And I don't know if this is a great kind of analogy to it, but I look at the solar panels, right? When I wasn't home, I think, when there was the really big boom, but there were so many tax credits, right, to put solar. So I think people were motivated to get them on the roof, not because of, the money they might be saving in the future on the electricity, but it was because it's going to be so cheap to do, so I got to do it right now. So bills like Bill 40 or other things. So with our new containers, the cost is at least 3 times. And forget if we could pay it, you can't even get it. So you're just having to spend time as a business owner, meeting new distributors, testing it out, trying to find the supply. There's no supply, you got to go find something else. If there's a way to have some of that subsidized, or is there a way that the government can help kind of bear the burden of the cost so it's not fully absorbed by the restaurant and then passed on some of it to the consumer? I think it would make the transition for a lot of these asks that they're requiring of us to be a lot smoother.
And just so, can you think of a way to facilitate that type of dialogue between legislatures and business people? Because my feeling, and there's a lot of people in this room that are way more knowledgeable about this than I am, but my feeling is there's some group, usually in this case, probably a well-intentioned environmental group, said, hey, we need to do this. We live on an island. It resonates with everybody. The legislature says, oh yeah, this is a great idea. Let's pass it. It builds momentum. And then the businesses are almost met flat-footed, and they get a call from the Chamber of Commerce saying do you know this is what's going to happen?
Yep.
And everybody's freaking out.
Yep.
So can you think of a more proactive
Yeah,
way?
you know, I see. I think there's a few folks in this room. I think inviting them to be part of these conversations. I spoke to folks from the Hawaii Restaurant Association ahead of here to kind of get their thoughts on this topic. And to their own, you know, their comment is that they weren't engaging as much. So I think conversation. I think Pam mentioned in the beginning of folks being able to join as many economic forums or chambers as possible to have that dialogue. Because I think everyone here, so the environmental groups are looking at one thing, businesses are looking at, our focus may not be on the environment, but our focus for all of us is how do we make Hawaii a better place for our families, and we just have different priorities. But I think if there's a way to have a good conversation, to hear the different sides of the stories, to hear the different challenges, just like you guys are trying to do here, I think that's very important. But you have to have the people in the room to have that dialogue.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the Woody Allen quote, half of life is just showing up and having the dialogue, right?
Yep,
so you got
absolutely.
to do that. I asked you for 3 to 5. You gave me 2. You don't have to do any more, but like my job as a moderator is to really push you.
Oh my gosh. No, I think there's a lot of things that can, that can be done. Like I said, in the terms of, I'm not going to add more, I'm just going to kind of give more thoughts. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who want to become entrepreneurs. And again, I saw that with all the people who sold their stores, but in terms of the people who bought them, the statistic that's very scary, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but is how successful businesses are once they open. I think it's like for restaurants, it's like a 40% it's probably higher than that closure rate. And I think so education is a big piece of that in terms of how to run a business. And I think there are a lot of people who can help facilitate that. The schools, banks, chambers, and I think all the pieces of the cost side, if there's any way that can be helped. And I think there are other conversations. So the restaurants, we have to deal with, you have the different panels coming up. We have to deal with land in the sense of that we have to pay rent to a landlord. We have to deal with supply chain and that all our products have to come in. We have to deal with farming and that if we're going to try to buy local, the farms. But we're at the bottom and we have to deal with all the challenges that they've had to deal with. Again, if there are better partnerships and better conversations that we can have up the line, again, we all have the same goal and we all have a way to bring drive revenue and drive jobs here in Hawaii, just in different ways, but how can we be more efficient with each other? Yeah.
And so one of the things I'm hearing from you and from our former panelists is there's like this compounding effect in the economy, right? Yep. So one, whether, and most things start off with good intentions, but one cost adds on to another cost, adds on to another cost, adds on to another cost. And you guys, in one sense, are pretty close to the final user. Yep. I mean, you're selling directly to, you're at the end of the supply chain, and so you're a recipient of like a lot of these things, right?
No, that's exactly correct.
Yeah. One of the things I'd love to hear from you, and you guys offer unique perspective, is you guys operate here in Hawaii and on the mainland. And so I was wondering, what are the big differences between your franchisees and your corporate operations on the mainland versus Hawaii? And is there anything that you see that could help us make the job of the entrepreneurs, these people, these immigrants that are trying to start their first business, coming hopeful, starry-eyed, make it easier for them?
Yeah, I think it's, I wish I have more insightful things, but it's a lot of the things that we already talked about. So I have this store in Texas, this franchisee, she's taking over an existing restaurant. She signed the lease about a month ago, and she's opening at the end of this month. So in 2 months, she turned her store around. In the meanwhile, I have an L&L in Waikoloa. I think we've been waiting for 2 years for many reasons of why it hasn't been open yet, but it's been about 2 years and it still has not opened. It probably won't open until next year. So there are, as we've talked about, a lot of things that make it much quicker to open your store. The labor piece, I think, this franchisee in Texas, it's still hard to find employees, but it's not as hard. There are more folks there, and in terms of the P&L, it's less costly to find employees there. I think the cost of doing business in Hawaii for our franchisees versus a one in Texas, their margin is probably 5 to 10 points lower here because of all the extra costs that they have to bear on an ongoing basis. But again, it's all relative. Not everything's the worst here in Hawaii. We have a lot of stores in California. California just passed a bill, 257, which kind of effectively unionizes restaurant workers, potentially pushing minimum wage up to $22 by next year. And that's very challenging. Again, I understand, a living wage, but if there's a way to, I think it's 18 right now, to push it to 22 in 1 year, when we're already facing so many, that would decimate margin for a lot of restaurants, put them in, they would have to close down. Or on the flip side, you're gonna find, you can't push your rent, you can't push your cost of goods, you can push labor out. Again, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit.
No,
but this
digress.
Is
we love
that I have.
digressions, yeah.
My worry is that the restaurant in 5 years, for the big chains at least, you're not going to have employees in there. You're going to have the kiosk that you order from or your app. This is why like McDonald's giving away like a whole Happy Meal or whatever to download the app, because they want you to download it, because then eventually they won't need to have someone taking your order. All of the big chains are working on robots in the back to flip the hamburgers, to cook the noodles, whatever it is. L&L is not anywhere near that right now, although we do have an app. Please download our app. But it's sad to me to think about a restaurant that doesn't have employees, because what's so amazing about restaurants is that you can come in from the lowest level job, whether it's a cashier or a dishwasher. You can be an immigrant who has no language skill or possibly education or no resources coming into the United States. And you can work your way up to become an owner of one store, multiple stores. I see this every day. And those opportunities might not exist in the future if we have to cut out pieces of what makes a restaurant because it's too expensive to run a restaurant.
Yeah, so a restaurant may become more of a capital-intensive business,
Yes.
which is more like, okay, in manufacturing,
Yeah.
you have to have a lot of access to capital, and it is not an entry-level business.
And it'll be those big companies that are able to get the economies of scale to do that versus the smaller ones.
Well, this has been really informative. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience, and then I have a couple questions from Zoom. Do you guys have any questions for our esteemed panelist? Jerry, can you come up to the microphone, please?
Elisia, thanks again. In general, from your own perspective, as well as perspectives of other business people that you know, in general, do you find the attitude of governmental agencies that you have to deal with supportive, negative, paternalistic, obstructionist, or
It's a loaded
what?
question, man.
Thanks.
Honestly, I think it would depend on the person, right? I think there have been, there are some politicians who are very business friendly. I think Mayor Blangiardi has done a lot of things in the last couple of years that are very supportive of businesses. And so I think it varies. I think generally, this is my opinion and my opinion only, is probably not a favorable opinion. But I think that's part of the dialogue that we just need to continue to have for a lot of times restaurants are thought of as the big bad guys who are just here, like, I don't know, making billions of dollars all the time and not caring about the small person. And if you look at a lot of the business owners, they're not, right? They're mom and pop operators. Their family is working in their store. Their kids are going to school here. They're giving back to the community. And they just want their business to survive. So I think it could be better, probably is the best way to say it.
Hi, thank you so much. Katie Rooney with Ulupono Initiative. So I am not a business owner, not going to be one. I'm not in that space. So I start with that caveat, but I do a lot in the policy and planning spaces. And I think one of the challenges in getting people to the table, like upstream, is that people don't come to the table until there's legislation on the ground, even if you try and do that. And there's examples on both sides where sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And I guess one of the questions I have for you, though, is what are some of the ways to get people to be interested at being at the table? And I get the time is an issue, but like if you're, I don't do plastics work or waste issues, but if you're coming from that perspective, you want to deal with this issue, right? And in fact, in some ways, it's an economic approach, which is trying to get the users bear the cost a little bit more of the distribution of plastics and the cleanup associated with it. But then nobody wants to talk about it until it becomes a bill. And I'm just sort of curious, like, how are the ways to engage with folks so that an issue that's really not top of mind for them, but has a lot of implications before the legislation gets proposed?
Yeah, no, and I thank you so much for asking that question. I don't know that I have a great answer, but I love that you're kind of thinking about how do we do this. So my off-the-cuff response is one of the best things about being in Hawaii are the relationships that we have. So for example, L&L being invited here is because Jerry knows my dad and reached out to my dad to ask if he could speak. And he's traveling, so I apologize. I think there was an iteration of the ads that had my dad on there, and you guys got me, but.
We lucked out.
I think it's the relationships. I think if there's someone who, and I'll put myself out there, if whatever connections there are in the restaurant space that I'm able to bring to the table, whether it's myself or someone else, and whoever I might know from other organizations to help bring to the table, because I think it's very important. And it's important to me. I know it's very important to the restaurant industry, but I think we have to lean on our relationships. But one of the great things about Hawaii is that that's a thing that works very well here.
Thanks, and the katsu's great.
Yeah, thank you.
As you're coming up, sir, we do have the Chamber of Commerce, and we do have a lot of institutions that are built to have these dialogues. And one of the other things that I'll just say from my point about working in international development is you can really create institutions or ongoing, like we meet every 6 months or every 3 months, get everybody in the room and say, what are we really concerned about? What are the legislation? What if we had legislators who had brought together businesses 3 months before and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing? I mean, there's a lot of just opportunities that we have about building these institutions that facilitate ongoing dialogue. Go ahead.
Thanks. Doug Adams, I'm the Director of Research and Development with the County of Hawaii. And so I'm going to like to ask either offline or we can do this right now, how do we solve the Waikoloa problem, right? That is not something, 2 years, it's not something that we're excited about hearing, obviously. We know that we have some issues that we're trying to work at within the administration since we've taken over, but that's just not acceptable. And we acknowledge that. So I'd be happy to talk to you about, what we can do to resolve that situation for you.
I appreciate that. I will find you afterwards and get your information. But this is great, right? See, I have
it's already working.
We're already solving problems, guys.
So on the question side of things, it's interesting to hear about the robotics and the AI and all of that, particularly with the large. And what that makes me wonder is it incumbent upon us to have legislation that ensures some type of ladder for our workers so that they can start at the low end, if you will, at the end that allows them to learn their way up, because it sounds like there is a concern about those positions, in a sense, going away, and there needing to be some type of leap that people are going to have to take to actually get into the workload. So your comments on that?
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily think that there has to be a ladder in the restaurants, and to be quite honest, I think there are a lot of restaurants where they're like a mom and pop probably doesn't have a ladder, right? You're not going to typically take over the mom and pop store. In a franchise organization like ours, you could buy a franchise after. How I like to think a lot about, a lot of the restaurant staff is that it's a first job. It's not meant to be a career. There's not meant to really be a ladder in the restaurant industry necessarily. But coming from high school or coming out of college or supplementing your time in college, it's a job that you go to learn basic skills like showing up on time, having personal, being able to talk to people, being able to be managed by somebody, or to learn managerial skills. And so what I would be thinking about, in terms of building a ladder, but if this is where we're moving to, is what industry is that going to be? If it's not going to be a restaurant industry or retail later on, where are people going to have their first job? where they can learn these skills. So that, I mean, we look at white collar jobs and people moving into that space, but it's not everyone can do that jump. And even if you do, I don't know what the statistic is. I think it's around 70% of people who have worked in a restaurant before at some time in their life. And there are a lot of skills that you can build there. And where are we going to get these skills if not in a restaurant or retail? I think we need to have conversations around that.
Great. Okay, so here's a question from Zoom. Some studies show that 90% of franchise businesses succeed. Why is the number so high? Because the Federal Trade Commission has established rules requiring the company who owns the brand to provide training and assistance to the franchisee. Think about it. Training costs money. Establishing a brand costs money. A franchise is relieved of those expenses and thus can come out ahead. Thus, shouldn't we, the Common Small Business Association, actually be the Small Franchise Association?
Yes. No, it is. I agree. I don't disagree. I think there should be resources out there to business owners that make it easier for them. The one time where it was so clear to me, recent time, is when we were all applying for PPP a couple years ago, right? Our franchisees here, I probably filled out 50 PPP applications for our franchisees because, on behalf of our franchisees, sorry, let me be clear, with their data. But most of our franchisees are immigrants, and they're excellent at running their restaurants, but it's a loan document, right? They can't read, I could barely read the loan document. I have an MBA. And they're scared because they're getting this huge loan that they don't really know what they're signing up for. They were only able to get PPP because they had the support of the franchisor to help them fill out the form. I don't know how many mom and pop stores there were out there who didn't get that opportunity because they couldn't understand it. There need to be chambers, there needs to be resources. I know banks were helping out a lot, but there needs to be more of that support because a lot of the things, a lot of people want to be business owners, and it's great to become an owner, but to have a sustainable business is tough. And we need to find ways to provide more resources. That point is absolutely correct.
Great. And then we'll just have one more question, and this is another Zoom question. The risks and difficulties don't go away when you resale with the resale of one of your franchisees or franchises. How do you help them assure success? Is selling your franchise to a larger corporation an option?
It's an option. The thing that I think is most interesting about when you do, and this is maybe not the right answer or the best answer, when you have a new franchisee, again, a lot of our franchisees have sold their stores because they're so tired. Maybe they've been doing it for 20 years. They've been on their feet for 20 years, 7 days a week. It's tough. It's great. It's established a financial stream for their family, but it's tough. When we get a new owner in, the chance of success increases even if they don't have the experience because they have the energy. And this is their dream. And they're gonna find a way, which is what I love about entrepreneurs. I think you guys said it correctly. They're gonna find a way to make it work. They don't know how, but they're gonna find a way to make it work. And so when we have that flow, which I think you'll miss if you have just big corporations around, but when you have that flow, you have that energy. And I think an entrepreneur is a very unique energy. I don't consider myself an entrepreneur. My dad was an entrepreneur. I'm more of a business person. And to see even in his age, the energy that he has, the ideas that he has, the drive that he has, the ability to see around problems, I think is a very unique skill. And that's, I don't think I answered the question properly, but I think that's a very, something that helps create success, is the energy and ideas and optimism that entrepreneurs bring.
Yeah, and one of the things that you do see, and this is entrepreneurs go where there's opportunities, right? And so we've all heard of great entrepreneurs operating in Hawaii and say, no, this is tough, I'm gonna go somewhere else and do that. So one of the great things that we can do is make the opportunities even bigger for entrepreneurs here, right? So I would just like to give a warm welcome, or warm thank you to Elisia, to Jorge, Tomas, to Kyle. And I really appreciate all of you guys. Thank you so much for each one of you participating in this. We're gonna take a short 15-minute break, and then we're gonna come back and talk about housing. Two things. One is I forgot to mention that we do have a happy hour after the conference. And so Leslie has tickets for the happy hour. Everybody will get, who's attended, will get at least one free drink. Even if you're not planning on going, go get your ticket and give somebody else, because they're gonna want to drink, right? And some people want to drink more. So I encourage you to do this. Also, during the breaks, the temptation is to check your email and go inward, but really the benefit and one of the reasons why we're all here is to talk to one another and discuss what we heard. And, there was a lot of stimulating discussions, a lot of stimulating ideas. So I really encourage you guys to use the breaks and the happy hour, if you guys can make it, to talk with one another and discuss and see what you guys want to do with this information. So thanks again to all 4 of these wonderful panelists. Thank you so much.